Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Ask Andrew, where each week I answer a question submitted by you, one of our BMFI viewers. This week's question: movie musicals were once a very popular genre. Why did they decline? It seems like they've made a comeback in the last few years. Do you see this as a passing fad or a more enduring trend? Well, I think it's very hard to argue that movie musicals have not declined since certainly the 1960s, and even then they were probably a little bit down from the 50s and the 40s. And the reasons why are, I think, derived from a number of sort of areas that impact the types of movies Hollywood makes in general. I certainly don't have sort of ironclad lock on an answer to this question, but I do have some ideas. I think one reason that musicals or the popularity of musicals has declined, well, actually, I guess that's sort of, part of the point right there, right? Hollywood is a business. Hollywood makes movies that it has reason to believe or thinks or anticipates or sometimes hopes audiences will want to go to. And uh, Hollywood had a rash of very expensive musicals at the end of the 1960s that did not do well. Movies like Hello Dolly and Star, exclamation point, starring Julie Andrews. And those movies nearly sank the studios that put them out there. And that sort of track record would make an industry gun shy about repeating those mistakes. That's not to say that there haven't been any successful musicals since the late 1960s. Certainly Grease was enormously successful in the 70s, Chicago in the early 2000s, La La Land was successful more recently, and there are other examples. I think, though, that Hollywood makes fewer movies than it used to. And I think if those movies are going to be costly and or complicated to produce, like musicals increasingly have been, they are looking for sure things. And part of the problem is that most, if not all, of the great American stage musicals have already been made into movies. And the sort of the Broadway hasn't dried up, but has certainly dwindled. And part of the reason it has dwindled is actually that the Broadway stage has borrowed a strategy from Hollywood, namely that they are looking to pre-existing properties to make musicals. So let's think about some of the more successful stage musicals of recent years. There is Hamilton, which is an original through and through, and the fact that it is an original in addition to its artistic merits is probably part of the reason it was such an enormous success. But if you look at a sort of list of what Broadway has been putting on in recent years and decades, a lot of it comes from the movies. And even though Hollywood tried with the producers to make a musical version of a stage musical that was itself based on a non-musical film, the movie didn't do very well. And the idea that people are going to want to see a remake of an entertaining or amusing film that is sort of a remake but isn't, and doesn't possess many of the same qualities because it's changed genres of the original movie, seems like a bit of a stretch, I would imagine, to most executives. So, Mean Girls has been a successful Broadway musical, and it was a reasonably successful movie as well. But does anyone think anyone wants to see a filmed musical version of Mean Girls, for example? It just doesn't seem appealing, and I'm not entirely sure why. Hollywood has had its share of successful movie musicals, as I said. Chicago was one, Evita was one, that didn't come out all that long ago, although now Evita is more than 20 years old and Chicago came out about 20 years ago. But sort of my point is that the sort of great original Broadway musicals have pretty much all been made into movies. And there's not, and the musicals that Broadway is putting on, by and large in recent decades, not entirely, but are significantly based on previously produced material. Think of the Disney musicals. Think of Kinky Boots. Think of Mean Girls, as I said before. So there's sort of a cannibalization almost going on, and the material that was there for Hollywood to make musicals, namely original successful stage musicals, isn't there in the same amount or concentration or quality that it was during those years that Hollywood was making more movie musicals. Another issue, I think, has to do with the genre, the film genre of the musical in general. Musicals are, by and large, upbeat, optimistic, positive stories. That doesn't mean bad things don't happen in them. That doesn't mean there aren't sometimes crises or tragedies or sometimes Nazis appear. But what it does mean is that at the end of the day, they are generally positive and upbeat and optimistic, and feature a main character who sees the best in the world and hopes for the best and is idealistic and optimistic. And Hollywood, by and large, isn't really in the business of making movies like that anymore, musical or not. Hollywood changed as the culture changed in the 60s and 70s, and has stayed on the trend of, cynicism and criticizing society and things like that. It is Hollywood's sort of general view of American culture is far different than it was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when it was much more uniformly positive and optimistic. And so when you have a genre that is, most examples of it are sort of optimistic and upbeat, and you have a film industry that isn't that way, or doesn't make movies that depict that view of the world or of America, then there's going to be a problem there, right? I mean, let's think about the movie musicals that Hollywood has made in recent years. There's Cats, which I saw when I was a kid on Broadway, but I can't remember or say sort of what general view of the world it has, but it kind of doesn't matter because it was a horrible bomb. There was Les Miserables, not the best view of the world. Chicago, not the best view of the world. Evita, Sweeney Todd. What are we talking about? So that's part of the issue. You did have something like La La Land, which was original and successful, but that was, I think, in part because of its novelty, in part because of the appeal of its stars, and frankly, in part because it deviated significantly, in my opinion, from the sort of traditional elements of the movie musical, of the genre. It kind of, if you remember, it has a split ending, and it kind of, the movie sort of had it both ways. Got to have its down ending and its up ending, which I know a lot of audiences love, but I personally found to be a bit sort of dishonest from a storytelling point of view. In any case, there will always be exceptions, but those are some of the larger reasons why there haven't been movie musicals certainly with the same acclaim or popularity as there were in past decades. And to answer the last part of your question, I don't think there's going, even though there have been the occasional successful ones over the recent years, I don't think we're going to see a significant comeback of that genre, at least in the live action format. Animation is something different. In the live action format anytime soon. But it's an interesting thing to think about, and I appreciate the question. And if you have a question you would like me to try to answer that is film related, please visit brynmarfilm.org, go to the Film Studies Online section, and use the Ask Andrew form. Who knows? Next time, maybe I'll be answering a question you sent in.